They erased her name. They deleted her matches. Her entire legacy was scrubbed from the digital annals, reduced to a ghost in the machine, a whisper among die-hard fans. The official narrative was simple. She never existed. But one night, amidst the roar of a sold-out arena and the blinding glare of television lights, she returned. And in a single, silent moment, she made the entire roster, the commentators, the executives, and every single person watching at home remember exactly who she is. This isn't just a story about a comeback. It's a story about what happens when an institution tries to bury a legend and discovers that some legacies are buried in soil so fertile they only grow back stronger. This is the story of Serafina, the weaver of wrestling, and the moment the empire she helped build tried to tear her down, only to watch her rise from the ashes they created. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, creeping death of a legacy, executed with the cold precision of a corporate directive. First, her merchandise vanished from the online store. Fans who refreshed the page found a 404 not found error where her iconic shirts once were. They chalked it up to a glitch, a common website error. Then, her profile was quietly removed from the active roster page. No farewell post, no best wishes in your future endeavors. One day she was there, a cornerstone of the division, and the next she was gone, leaving a conspicuous void that the website's code seemed to awkwardly stretch to cover. The real panic began when the video archives were targeted. Classic pay-per-views suddenly had a match missing. Historic moments, once heralded as turning points for the industry, were edited out of highlight reels. Her face, her name, her very presence was being meticulously excised from history, like a disgraced pharaoh chiseled from a temple wall. A nameless digital archivist, sitting in a sterile office in Stamford, Connecticut, likely felt a small pang of something, maybe guilt, maybe just professional fatigue, as they dragged her files into the digital trash bin. With each click, a championship victory vanished. A five-star classic became a forgotten memory. A generation of fans who grew up chanting her name were being silently gaslighted. The company wasn't just firing an employee, they were attempting to perform a retroactive lobotomy on their own history, hoping no one would notice the scar tissue left behind. But they underestimated the digital age. They underestimated the fans who had saved those matches, who had recorded those promos. The erasure didn't destroy her. It turned her into forbidden lore, a myth whispered about in forums and on late-night podcasts. They had made her a ghost, not realizing that ghosts have a way of haunting the living forever. In the vacuum left by Serafina's digital ghost, a deafening silence grew. The wrestling media, usually so quick to pounce on backstage drama, was strangely quiet. Seasoned journalists would receive anonymous tips, but when they reached out to the company for comment, they were met with a firm, chillingly uniform no comment. It was an unspoken edict from the top. Her name was not to be uttered. On commentary, announcers who had once praised her as a once-in-a-generation talent now danced around her legacy with practiced awkwardness. They would reference a specific wrestling hold she invented, but call it by a generic name. They would talk about a legendary rivalry, but only mention her opponent's name, leaving an unsettling, phantom-like gap in the narrative. It was a masterclass in corporate censorship, and its effect was deeply unnerving. The fans felt it most acutely. They would chant her name at live events, a desperate plea for acknowledgement, only for the sound mixers to lower the crowd volume on the broadcast, masking their rebellion. Signs bearing her likeness were confiscated at the door by security guards with apologetic eyes. The message was clear. Your memory is not welcome here. This corporate silence forced the community to become her historians. They created tribute videos, archived her matches on obscure servers, and wrote long, passionate essays about her impact. They refused to let the official narrative win. While the company presented a polished, sanitized version of its history, The fans were building a digital monument to the woman they were told to forget. The company wanted silence, but in doing so, they gave the fans a singular cause to rally around. They had taken her voice, so the fans became her choir, their whispers of defiance growing louder than any official broadcast ever could. Even with her name scrubbed from the history books, Serafina's influence was a current that still ran deep beneath the surface of the product. You could see it in the little things. A rookie wrestler, desperate to make an impression, would use a sequence of moves Serafina made famous, a subtle nod that only veteran fans would catch. The live crowd would pop, a ripple of recognition, while the commentators would simply praise the rookie's innovative offense, deliberately ignoring the clear homage. It was a strange, unspoken language. The wrestlers were speaking to the fans, and the fans were speaking back, all while the company tried to pretend they couldn't hear. Her fingerprints were all over the women's division she had helped build. The confidence with which they carried themselves, the expectation of main-eventing pay-per-views, the very idea that they were draws and not just accessories, that was her legacy. She had kicked down doors so fiercely that not even her erasure could fully close them. Backstage, her presence was felt even more strongly. In the training facility, there was a scuffed-up corner of a practice ring where she had spent countless hours mentoring younger talent. New recruits were never officially told who wore down that canvas, but the veterans knew. They'd watch a promising young star struggling with a maneuver and say, "No, not like that. The Weaver used to anchor her weight differently. Try it her way." The Weaver. It was the name they used when they didn't want to say her real name. It was a code, a sign of respect. She was the ghost of the performance center, the standard to which everyone was still held. The company may have removed her from their promotional material, but they couldn't remove her from the muscle memory of the roster. She had become more than a wrestler. She had become a technique, a philosophy, a benchmark for greatness that persisted long after her image had faded from the screen. Far from the bright lights and roaring crowds in a quiet suburban home, the erasure had a different, more personal weight. Serafina's father, a grizzled veteran of the territories himself, would sit in his worn leather armchair, the television muted. He had her last championship belt polished and displayed on the mantelpiece, a relic from a world that now pretended it didn't exist. He understood the business. He knew about politics, about egos, about the cold calculus of the machine. But this was different. This wasn't just his daughter being fired. It was an attempt to nullify her entire existence, and with it, his own pride. Friends and neighbors, meaning well, would ask, "Is your daughter still wrestling?" And he'd have to find the words to explain that she was. And yet she wasn't. How do you explain to someone outside the bubble that your child's entire professional life has been deemed inconvenient history? Her mother handled it with a quiet, simmering anger. She would see other wrestlers, women her daughter had trained and elevated, getting opportunities and accolades that should have been hers. She saw them as beneficiaries of a sacrifice her daughter was forced to make. The family gatherings became tense. The unspoken truth of Serafina's exile hung in the air, a permanent guest at the dinner table. They never pushed her to talk about it. They saw the toll it took on her, the way she would stare blankly at the wall, lost in a memory, the way she flinched when a wrestling commercial came on the television. They had watched her give her body, her youth, and her soul to that company. And in return, the company had not only shown her the door, but had tried to board it up behind her, hoping to trap her legacy inside. For her family, the fight wasn't about championships or fame. It was about reclaiming the story of a daughter they were immensely proud of. The edict of silence from the corporate office created a deep fracture within the locker room. It became a source of unspoken tension, a line drawn in the sand between two distinct generations of performers. The younger talent, those who had come up after Serafina's departure, only knew the official story. She was trouble. A cautionary tale whispered by producers about the dangers of defiance. To them, she was a myth. a ghost story used to ensure compliance. They saw her fans' chants as disruptive and her lingering influence as a shadow they had to escape. They wanted to build their own legacies, not stand on the shoulders of someone the company had deemed a pariah. They followed the company line, never mentioning her name, never acknowledging her work, hoping their obedience would be rewarded with the opportunities she had thrown away. But the veterans, the ones who had shared the road with her, saw it differently. They remembered the long car rides, the shared hotel rooms, the way she would fight for better pay and safer conditions for everyone, not just herself. They felt a profound, collective guilt. In their quiet moments, huddled in corners of the catering hall, they would talk. "She was right, you know," one would murmur. "That storyline they wanted her to do, it was a betrayal of everything she'd built." Another would nod, staring into his coffee. "We should have stood with her, but the mortgage was due." Their silence was a heavy cloak of complicity. This division festered. It created an atmosphere of mistrust. The younger wrestlers saw the veterans as bitter and stuck in the past, while the veterans saw the new guard as naive, opportunistic, and blind to the very real sacrifices that had paved the way for them. The locker room wasn't a team anymore. It was a collection of individuals walking on eggshells. Meanwhile, in the pristine, glass-walled boardrooms of Titan Tower, a different kind of anxiety was setting in. The decision to erase Serafina, once seen as a necessary display of corporate power, was beginning to look like a catastrophic strategic error. The quarterly numbers were in, and they were stagnant. Merchandise sales were flat. Television ratings were slowly eroding. The social media engagement, once a source of immense pride, was now filled with cynical, disengaged comments. There was a palpable lack of excitement, a missing spark that no amount of pyrotechnics or celebrity guest hosts could replicate. The current champion, a performer hand-picked by the committee for her marketable look and compliant attitude, was technically proficient, but emotionally hollow. Her matches were fine, but forgettable. Her promos were scripted and sterile. She didn't command the same visceral, unscripted devotion that Serafina had. The executives would never admit it aloud, but they knew. They had created a void that they had no idea how to fill. They had tried to manufacture a new star in a lab, forgetting that true legends are born, not built. They saw the fan-made tribute videos of Serafina online, videos with millions of views, and a bitter irony settled in. They owned a multi-billion-dollar media empire, yet they couldn't generate the organic buzz that these amateur editors were creating with old, stolen footage. The brand was suffering from a crisis of authenticity, and Serafina, the woman they had branded as a traitor, was the living embodiment of everything they now lacked. The pressure was mounting. Sponsors were asking pointed questions. The network was concerned. The machine, for the first time in a long time, was sputtering. And the name of the missing part, the ghost in their machine, was the one name nobody was allowed to say. It was the main event of their biggest show of the summer. The champion, the company's chosen one, stood in the ring, her title held high. The match had just ended in a chaotic, unsatisfying disqualification, and the crowd was restless, their boos echoing a season's worth of frustration. Then something happened that wasn't in the script. The arena lights flickered, once, twice, and then plunged the entire stadium into absolute darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the 20,000 people in attendance. It wasn't the planned, theatrical darkness of a typical entrance. It was a sudden, jarring blackout. The Titantron screen was dead. The announcers' headsets went silent. For a few seconds, the only sound was the nervous murmuring of the crowd. Then, a single haunting chord echoed through the speakers, a sound no one had heard in years. It was the opening note of her old entrance music. A low, mournful cello that slowly built into a powerful, defiant crescendo. The murmurs turned into a roar of disbelief, then recognition, then pure, unadulterated ecstasy. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the top of the entrance ramp. And there she was, a silhouette. She didn't move. She just stood there, letting the moment hang in the air, letting the sound wash over her. The fans were on their feet, screaming, crying, a tidal wave of emotion years in the making. She began to walk, not with the energetic sprint of a typical wrestler, but with a slow, deliberate, almost funereal pace. She wasn't coming back to entertain them. She wasn't there to pop a rating. She was a specter returning to her haunting grounds, and every step she took was a hammer blow against the corporate wall that had tried to keep her out. The silence had been broken, and the storm had finally arrived. As Serafina reached the bottom of the ramp, the house lights slowly came back up, bathing the arena in a stark, unforgiving glow. The roster, who had poured out from the back to see what the commotion was, stood frozen on the stage, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and awe. She walked past the announcer's table, not even glancing at the men who had been forbidden from speaking her name. They stared, slack-jawed, scripts forgotten. She ascended the steel steps one at a time, with the calm demeanor of someone returning home. She stepped through the ropes and into the center of the ring, coming to a stop just a few feet from the reigning champion. The champion, who had been a picture of corporate-approved confidence moments before, now looked like a child seeing a ghost. Her manufactured bravado evaporated, replaced by a raw, genuine fear. She held her championship title like a shield, a useless piece of metal against an elemental force. Serafina didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She just looked at the champion. It was a stare that contained everything: the betrayal, the exile, the silent years, the burning fire of her legacy. It was a look that said, "You are standing in my house. You are holding my property, and you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." The crowd was deafening, but in the ring, there was a pocket of absolute silence between the two women. The champion's eyes darted around, looking for help, for a producer, for anyone to tell her what to do, but no one moved, no one spoke. In that single, silent confrontation, the power dynamic of the entire company shifted. Serafina hadn't touched anyone. She hadn't uttered a single syllable, but she had taken back her kingdom with nothing more than a look. The queen had returned to her castle, and the pretender to the throne was about to learn what true royalty looked like. The moment the broadcast ended, the machine went into overdrive. The carefully constructed narrative had been shattered, and now came the frantic scramble to pick up the pieces and reassemble them into something manageable. The company's social media, which had been ignoring her existence for years, suddenly posted a single cryptic image of her silhouette in the ring with the caption, "She's back." It was a stunning reversal, an implicit admission of their own defeat. In the post-show press conference, the company's chief executive, a man known for his iron-fisted control, was visibly flustered. He spun a tale of a long-negotiated, top-secret deal, painting her return as a brilliant surprise he had orchestrated all along. He called it a new era, hoping to co-opt her rebellion and sell it as his own masterstroke. But no one was buying it. The media saw through the flimsy PR spin. The fans knew better. They had been the ones keeping her legacy alive when the company wanted it dead. This wasn't the company's victory. It was theirs. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric with chaos and uncertainty. Contracts were being reread. Power dynamics were being reassessed. The veterans who had privately supported her now did so openly, a weight lifted from their shoulders. The younger talent who had seen her as a cautionary tale now looked at her with a new, terrified respect. She had done the impossible. She had defied the system and won. She held all the cards. The company needed her far more than she needed them. She wasn't just another wrestler on the payroll anymore. She was a kingmaker, an icon whose approval could legitimize a champion and whose disapproval could shatter a career. Her return wasn't just a moment. It was a revolution. The foundation of the empire had cracked, and through that crack, a new, untamable power had emerged.